Shalom, Stiebel Wonder Gardeners, students, learners in the Stiebel Wonder Garden Academy. This is Rabbi Ben, and this is the first of a series of instructional videos that will guide you through the topics that we will be discussing in our sessions, and will hopefully lead you to a place where you can begin working on your exhibitions, your projects, related to the topic at the beginning of our next session. I'm also going to review a little bit of what was in the last session so that you still have that in your mind as well, and to reinforce that. So we're going to begin by just talking a little bit about our last session, which was Sukkot, and it was a demo of the school on Sukkot, where we did Havdalah, we had a Sukkot gathering with the wider community, and we looked at a series of topics. This was the order of the evening. We had music, we introduced ourselves, and I gave a teaching on impermanence. First I'll say one of the songs we sang was Ivdu et Hashem besimcha, Bo lefanav birnana, which means serve Hashem, God, or work for God, Hashem, however you want to define God, with joy. So for me that means going about our daily lives with a joyful attitude, and that's one of the themes of Sukkot, is to be joyful. Another theme is impermanence, which was the main theme of the evening. We sang this song, Rings of Grass, by Shel Silverstein, which sort of gives the feeling of what impermanence is all about, which is that everything is passing away, everything is dying. We had a nice discussion about, if everything is dying, everything is impermanent, is there anything that is permanent? And we had some wonderful suggestions, one of which was information, which I think is a very interesting idea. That relates to the idea of God as information, or chokhmah in Hebrew, meaning wisdom. And actually in the book of Ecclesiastes, they do talk a bunch about wisdom. So the other thing I should mention that I talked about is that on Sukkot, we study the book of Ecclesiastes, which was supposedly written by King Solomon. And the book of Ecclesiastes talks a lot about impermanence and things changing. This song, turn, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, is from the book of Ecclesiastes, which we read on Sukkot, and we sang that song together. Then I brought up some very key concepts. One was the idea of King Solomon, and King Solomon having written the book of Ecclesiastes. He's the king in Israel who built the first temple. He was the son of King David, and he wrote Ecclesiastes, which in Hebrew is called Kohelet, the book of Kohelet. And I told a creative story with the younger children and the older children, and everybody was there, but the younger children sort of acted in it. And the story was about the magic ring of Solomon that he sends his servant to go get, and this ring was supposed to make somebody who puts it on who was happy sad, and somebody who puts it on who is sad happy. And Solomon doesn't think that such a ring exists, but in the end his servant Benayahu ben Yehoyada, who I called Ben for short, found the ring by just having a jeweler carve on a ring the three letters in Hebrew, Gimel, Zayin, and Yud, which stands for this phrase here, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. And the idea is that if you put it on and you're happy and you hear the phrase, this too shall pass, you get sad because you realize your happiness will pass. And if you put it on and you're sad and you read Gam ze ya'avor, you realize that your sadness will pass and it makes you happy. Back to the key concepts. So within all of this is the idea of the fragility of life, and everything is impermanent and everything is dying and everything passes. There's a phrase in Ecclesiastes, Hevel Havalim, which means emptiness of emptiness. And it's basically saying that everything is sort of empty, and there's no inherent meaning except for that which we bring to our lives. And then I also discussed the 4 species that we shake on Sukkot. These are the 4 species that we discussed: the palm, the myrtle, the willow, and the citron. The palm, myrtle, and willow is collectively called the lulav, even though lulav really just means palm in Hebrew. And the citron is the etrog. And there are lots of different ways of looking at what these 4 species represent. One is different parts of the body. Another idea that came up is different people within the people of Israel, and sort of you hold them all together, and it's an idea of unity, that we're all sort of one. And there's another teaching that I didn't bring up, which is that, or I might have just alluded to, which is that the 4 species represent 4 different kinds of people. People who have Torah and mitzvot, meaning they study and they act, and then people who just study and don't act, or people who act and don't study, and then the last one is people who neither study nor act. And so there's lots of different interpretations. If you're interested in some texts on this, please email me, Rabbi Ben Newman, at gmail.com or at shtiebel.net, and I can send you some of those texts. And so those were some of the key concepts that we talked about. Also talked about what a sukkah is in general. The top has to be open to the stars. You cover the top with schach, which is the leaves that you put on the top of the sukkah. And it has to have at least 3 walls. I didn't mention that, but it does. And we invite ushpizin, which means in Aramaic guests, into our sukkah, that being the 4 forefathers, and also in modern times the 4 mothers. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then King David and Joseph and many of the others. And we've actually taken to the practice of inviting people who have passed on, who we would want to feel their presence in the sukkah. So I've often asked in a sukkah, who would you invite into the sukkah? So I invite you, if you still have time for Sukkot, the last day, to go to a sukkah. You can go to a Shtiebel sukkah and invite in the presence of people who have passed away, who you would like to feel their presence. And then the last thing I talked about is the holiday of Simchat Torah, which is right after Sukkot, the day after Sukkot, where we finish reading the Torah at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and we begin the book of Bereshit, of Genesis. So those are some key concepts that I hope you got out of our first session at Shtiebel, at the Shtiebel Wonder Garden Academy. And I also created a series of quizzes as well. And these quizzes, sorry, Siri just interrupted me for a second. She thought I was saying Siri. A little humor in our videos. These quizzes can be found on the Shtiebel School Resources page. If you click through here, quizzes for sessions, it's shtiebel.net/quiz. And the first quiz from our first session is here, the Sukkot Magical Mega Quiz. And you start it, and I would like you, before our next session, to take the quiz and take it as many times as you need to until you get 7 out of 7 correct. And then there's another quiz, which is for our next session, which I'd like you to also take before the next session begins, so that you're prepared for the next session to start off really on a strong footing with your project. And this is the Love Your Neighbor quiz, and I encourage you to take this and to get 8 out of 8 correct before you even come to our first session. So right now I'm going to give a little background so that you can pass the second quiz. So let's dive into that now. So our second session is on the idea of ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which means loving your neighbor as yourself. And the reason that we decided to bring up this topic this particular week is because it is Parashat Bereshit. It's the first parsha of the Torah this Saturday. And if you look, Bereshit, you will find, you can look it up on Wikipedia. You find Bereshit is the first parsha in the beginning of Genesis. And here we have the story of the creation of the world and of humanity. And I would just want to emphasize that the Torah is, in my view, not a history book. So we're not looking at Bereshit as an accurate history of the creation of the world specifically. I myself believe in evolution and the Big Bang, and I look more at the story of Bereshit in the Torah as a way to frame sort of human existence and to bring up big questions about what it means to be a human being and what it means to get along with other people. Incidentally, the Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism, has a creation story which seems sort of similar to the Big Bang, but we're not going to go into that today. So what I decided to emphasize was the story of Cain and Abel from the Garden of Eden. So the story goes that Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. And Cain ends up killing his brother Abel out of jealousy. And so right after he kills him, God comes to Cain and says, where is your brother Abel? And Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? And it's a very, very famous quote. And then God says, your brother's blood cries out from the ground. And Cain becomes cursed to wander the earth forever, a ceaseless wanderer, it says here. And that he would have a mark on him forever. And so that's the story of Cain and Abel. And so the reason you can glean that we brought up, we're bringing up ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor as yourself here, is because this is the central question of Cain and Abel, is are we responsible for our brothers and our sisters on this earth? What is the limits of our responsibility to our brothers and our sisters on this earth? So if you want to sort of dive into the concept of loving your neighbor as yourself, there's this page here, jewishvirtuallibrary.org, be loving to your neighbor as you would yourself. So feel free to log on to that and read the texts here. There's a text from Leviticus. There's a text from Nachmanides, who talks about the limits of loving your neighbor as yourself. And there's a story here that we'll also talk about on Saturday about Hillel, that a non-Jew comes before Shammai, Hillel's sort of counterpoint rabbi, and says to him, I'll convert on the condition that you teach me the whole Torah while standing on one foot. And the story goes that Shammai pushed him aside with a measuring stick, or basically hit him with a ruler. And then the same person comes before Hillel, and Hillel converts him by saying, that which is hateful to you or is despicable to you, do not do to your neighbor or to your fellow. This is the whole Torah, and the rest is commentary. Now go and learn it. And really, that's the central point, I think, of the entire Jewish tradition is that we need to be kind to one another, and that which is hateful to ourselves, don't do to other people. That being said, I want to go back to Cain and Abel for a moment. I encourage you, if you'd like a decent amount of background, to look on myjewishlearning.com. This article here, /article /Cain-and-Abel-hot-topic, and read this here. You can get the full text of that portion of the Torah there. And here's a little synopsis here. And then there's a midrash that you can click through. And a midrash is the stories that the rabbis told to sort of fill the gaps in the Torah. And there are multiple different midrashes, meaning multiple different stories about the same topic that sort of sometimes even contradict each other. And so the midrash also helps us see that the Torah is not supposed to be a history book of what factually happened, but more about ideas related to the text itself. And sort of the Torah is teaching us lessons, and the rabbis sort of emphasize that through the midrash. So there's a great midrash here. What made Cain kill Abel? Was it jealousy over his own rejected sacrifices? Why would God choose the sacrifice of one brother over another? If you read the text, that's what it seems like. And the first midrash I wanted to bring up is from a book called Bereshit Rabbah, and it says, and Cain spoke unto his brother Abel, about what did they quarrel? Come, they said, let us divide the world. One took the land and the other the movables. The former said, the land you stand on is mine, and the latter retorted, what you are wearing is mine. One said, strip, the other said, fly off the ground. Out of this quarrel, Cain rose up against his brother Abel. So according to this understanding, they're sort of both at fault in a way, Cain and Abel, and they had a disagreement that they both sort of had a part in. And here's another one, Bereshit Rabbah 22:7, about what was their quarrel. Rab Huna said, an additional twin was born with Abel, and each claimed her. The one claimed, I will have her because I am the firstborn, while the other maintained, I must have her because she was born with me. So in this explanation, it was sort of a fight over who would be able to marry this twin of Abel. And there's many different interpretations. You see here it says multiple interpretations. And it poses the question, which story is more correct? And here it says both. This is a really key understanding I'd like you to get, that Midrash and Torah is a literature that allows for multiple interpretations. It is a kind of poetry that demands that we explore every shade of God's intended meaning, or the author's intended meaning. While one might argue logically that the first Midrash did not agree with the second, simply because they are composed by different authors, that is the very point. The goal of the rabbis was precisely in the exercise of drashing, seeking and finding meaning in the text to come up with their own interpretations. Each one adds something new to the mix, bringing out small details that answer the basic questions of human nature. So, and that's what I would say to all of you, that part of your job as students in the Shtibel Wonder Garden Academy is to make your own drashes and to learn how to make drashes on the Torah and your own interpretations, and find your own meaning in the text through your own interpretations. So that is sort of on one foot, no pun intended, what the story of Cain and Abel has to do here with this idea of loving your neighbor as yourself. And I also wanted to bring up another resource and another text about loving your neighbor. This resource is Sefaria.org. It has amazing resources, including text sheets that were made by rabbis on a variety of topics. Here's a text sheet on Love Your Fellow. If you'd like to take a look at this, I would encourage you to go to Sefaria.org /sheets/7644, and you can see in Hebrew and in English the story of Hillel and Shammai with Hillel having to answer the whole of Torah on one foot. Also, some commentary from Rashi on that story, who's a very famous rabbi. That's only in Hebrew, so if you'd like to cut your teeth on that with me, I'd be happy to do that with you at a future time. Just let me know. And some other interpretations here, but the one I wanted to focus on is that of the Ramban, who was a medieval rabbi. He says the phrase "love your neighbor as yourself" cannot be meant literally, since man cannot be expected to love his neighbor as himself. Moreover, Rabbi Akiba has ruled that your life comes first. The Torah here enjoins us that we should wish upon our neighbor the same benefits that we wish upon ourselves. Perhaps this is the reason for the dative instead of the accusative form of the verb phrase. We find the same in "and you shall love him as yourself." Indeed, sometimes a person may wish upon his neighbor certain benefits, but only wealth, not wisdom, and the like. But even if he wishes his cherished friend well in everything, in other words, wealth, honor, learning, and wisdom, he will not do so unstintingly. He will still insist on a larger share of the benefit. It is this shortcoming that the Torah condemned. Rather, a man should wish his fellow well in everything, just as he does in his own case, and he should place no limitations on his love. Therefore, in the case of Jonathan and David, from the book of Samuel 20:17, it says that Jonathan loved him as his own soul, since he had removed all jealousy from his heart, declaring, "And you shall rule over Israel." So the idea here is not that you should literally love your neighbor just like you love yourself, but that you should wish them all good things just like you would wish all good things to happen to you. So those are some of the key concepts of loving your neighbor as yourself, which is the topic that we're going to be discussing this Saturday at the Shtibel Wonder Garden Academy. And I encourage you in the next couple of days to think about some kind of project that you could work on with your group, would be that geeks, bards, or makers, that would reflect these concepts of loving your neighbor as yourself, as also the concepts of Bereshit, the story of Cain and Abel, the story of Hillel standing on one foot, and Shammai hitting the man with the ruler. The word ahava itself, which I guess I should mention, ahava is Hebrew for love. So something, if you could also integrate that word itself, aleph, hey, bet, hey, ahava. And then also this idea that Nachmanides came up with, what are the limits of our love and responsibilities to the other? And maybe you could also think about the question, are we actually our brother's keeper, and to what extent are we responsible for one another? So that's some of the things I'd like you to think about for our next session. Also, now I have some texts here. This is from a book called Teaching Jewish Virtues, and I'm going to send these out to the whole list. These are some pages from that book about loving your neighbor as yourself and the limits of this, and some texts about loving your neighbor as yourself. So with that, I'm going to sign off for now. I encourage you to take the quiz about loving your neighbor as yourself, which I showed you before, which is, again, here, shtibel.net/quiz. Please take the Sukkot quiz and then the Loving Your Neighbor as Yourself quiz. And I would really like you to get 100% on each of those quizzes before our next session. Thank you so much, and I will see you all on Saturday, 3:30 to 5. Take care.